banjo here. This one, as you might have recognized, is what we generally call a minstrel banjo, minstrel style banjo. This one is, it is vintage, but it's not antique. It was made in the 1990s by Bob Flesher down there in Peachtree City, Georgia, back in the 1990s. This was his Boucher model. As you can see, it's a very fine instrument. It's a beautiful piece of beautiful maple neck. They call that flame maple or curly maple. Tiger maple kind of resembles the tail of a tiger. It's a beautifully made instrument. Bob did a fine job on it. It's got a plain maple hoop on it, I do believe. And it's interesting for, it's great for a couple of reasons. One, it's from the 1990s, so it really is one of the earlier examples of a reproduction minstrel banjo. And it's just starting to get enough age on it that it's starting to show a little bit of patina. You can see some cracking in the finish. But Bob, he made a fine banjo. He still does. But this one's great. As you heard, it's very loud. It's loud, and it's very good to look at. It's also very easy to play. So he did a fine job on it. As far as if you're looking for an exact replica of a Boucher banjo, it's not exact. There's some differences. One thing I'll note is, on every Boucher banjo I've seen, there's a flat, a flat square space here. See how it's square, flat on the sides? Well, on the original Bouchers, that pretty much every time I've seen it, that flatness extends up to about here before Boucher started rounding it, or Boucher, however they say it, before Boucher started rounding it up into the neck. A couple other minor differences I can think of off the bat. Bob's neck is a solid piece of maple through here. Every Boucher banjo I've ever seen, it was pieced here. It was actually made of two thick boards glued together here. So you'll always see a seam, almost always, I think, on a Boucher banjo through here. The other thing that Boucher always did that Bob didn't do is the heel joint there. Bob used the two slotted screws, which is typical of older and even early banjos. It was very common for 1, 2, or 3 slotted screws to be used in that position. But every Boucher banjo I've ever seen, he used a little piece of wire, almost like a cotter pin. It's pinned in there with a piece of wire. So that's, things that, Bob basically got right was the shape of the peg head. That to me looks pretty darn close to an original Boucher. This little beehive boss right here, you might call that. That is a separate piece that's glued on, as it is on a Boucher. A lot of times too, I've noticed Boucher banjo will have the nut is wider than the neck. So it'll actually stick out a little way. It's sort of an old school woodworker's thing to make it easier to move the nut, to remove it and replace it, whatever. But Bob made his flesh with the neck, but that's more comfortable for the modern player. Basically everything Bob did here, he sort of simplified the design and made it a little bit more comfortable for a contemporary player. One thing he did copy from Boucher is this neat end block in here. You see that on a lot of early banjos and stuff too. But anyhow, neat banjo. I'm going to retune it because, what I played there in the beginning was called the Coon Hunt Walk Around. That's pretty much my only minstrel tune that I ever learned. I learned that out of the Briggs manual, 1850s Briggs banjo instructor. And I do believe Coon Hunt Walk Around is the first piece in that book. Just as an aside, years and years ago, when I guess I was 16 years old, back in the 90s, I think, I first learned about minstrel banjo through people like Bob Flesher and stuff playing it. And I was going to Civil War reenactments a lot then. I was a big-time historical reenactor for many years. And so the common word then was that, oh, well, if you want to play correct Civil War period banjo, you got to play minstrel. You have to have a fretless sort of minstrel style banjo, and you need to learn how to play the old stroke style, they call it, or banjo style, out of the old banjo tutors. So I picked up a copy of the Briggs manual at a reenactment. I got myself a fretless tack head banjo from Bob Thornburg. He's another guy he's out in California. He makes a nice fretless tack head banjo. So I had one of those, and I cracked open that book, and I was going to learn every piece in that book and be a real, true, authentic Civil War banjo player. And I learned the coon hunt walk around, and I said, okay, that's different. That sounds sort of archaic, maybe even African American sounding. And then I went on and I started to learn some of the other pieces in the book, and sort of like how I did with bluegrass banjo, I lost interest very rapidly in the minstrel style banjo picking. It kind of all struck me as sort of gaudy, whitewashed circus music, really. Sort of carnival kind of stuff. Didn't sound very authentic to me. In those days I was already listening to recordings of Dink Roberts and Odell Thompson, John Jackson, and there are others whose names escape me right now. And so it kind of struck. If you listen to Dink Roberts or Odell Thompson, and then you listen to a recording of some tunes out of the Briggs manual or the Rice manual or Converse or these other 1850s, 1860s stage performance pieces, I had a hard time seeing very much continuity between those two. So it kind of struck me that the minstrel music was kind of BS. That's how I felt then, and that's really how I feel today. My position has grown less severe on it. If somebody's playing minstrel music now, I sort of take it for what it is. It's 19th century sheet music, performance stage music. And if somebody plays it well, it can be really nice, and I totally respect that, and I think that's fine. I didn't back in the day. I was a lot nastier about it back then. I really didn't like it, but... Hook and line, I do believe, is a really archaic old piece of music, and I've tried to play it in as old-timey a way as possible to maybe give us a little bit more of an idea of where I think 19th century and perhaps even 18th century banjo pickers were coming from. But anyhow, I don't want to get off on a long tangent about it. The main reason for this video is that I wanted to present this really fine 1990s Bob Flesher Boucher-style minstrel banjo. Bob did a lovely job on it, just wonderful. And it is really, it's a vintage piece of history. Bob is an important banjo maker and banjo player to this day. So it's an interesting piece of history to see this. That's something that he made back in the 1990s when information was very limited and very few people were talking about these types of instruments back then. So I really think Bob outdid himself. He made a lovely instrument here. There's his signature and stuff inside. Okay, everybody, that's all I want to do on this. This is our 1990s Bob Flesher Boucher-style banjo. Thanks for looking.